The dust settled on Rose Harper's skirts as she lay sprawled in the prairie grass 3 miles outside Tombstone, Arizona, staring up at the endless September sky of 1882, trying to memorize every curve and wisp of the clouds overhead because her father had told her that morning she would be married to Luther Graves by month's end, and she wanted to capture something beautiful before her life became a cage. She had been there for nearly an hour, tracing the shapes with her eyes, whispering their forms to herself like prayers, when she heard the jingle of spurs and the soft crunch of boots in the dry earth. She did not turn her head, did not acknowledge the presence, because whoever it was would either shoot her, rob her, or tell her to go home, and none of those options seemed particularly worse than what awaited her in town. The stranger said nothing. Rose heard more footsteps, closer now, and then the rustle of someone lowering themselves to the ground. She remained still, her hands folded across her stomach, her eyes fixed on a cloud that looked remarkably like a horse mid-gallop. From the corner of her vision, she saw him, a tall figure in worn denim and a black hat, lying down beside her in the grass, his head tilted back, watching the sky just as she was. They stayed like that for several minutes, two strangers side by side in the vastness of the Arizona territory, saying nothing, simply watching the clouds drift and change. Rose felt her heart hammering in her chest, but not from fear. There was something oddly peaceful about this moment, something that made her throat tighten with an emotion she could not name. "That one looks like a buffalo," the man said finally, his voice low and rough, like stones tumbling in a creek bed. He pointed to a massive cumulus formation drifting eastward. Rose turned her head slightly, studying his profile. He had a strong jaw, covered in dark stubble, and his eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds themselves. He could not have been much older than 25, maybe 26. She was 21, old by Tombstone standards for an unmarried woman, which was precisely why her father had arranged the match with Luther Graves, a 53-year-old mine owner who had already buried 2 wives. "I thought it looked more like a ship," Rose said quietly, surprising herself by speaking at all. The man turned his head toward her, and she saw the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. A ship in the Arizona desert. That would be something. "I have never seen the ocean," Rose admitted, returning her gaze to the sky. "But I have read about it. In books." "Same here," the man said. He shifted slightly, adjusting his gun belt. Rose noticed he wore his pistol on his left hip, which meant he was left-handed. "Read about a lot of things I have never seen. Sometimes I think the reading is better than the seeing would be." "Do you really believe that?" Rose asked, finally turning to look at him fully. He met her eyes, and something passed between them, some recognition that neither could quite articulate. "No," he said honestly, "but it is a comfort when you are stuck somewhere you did not choose to be." Rose felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "Yes," she whispered, "I understand that." The man sat up slowly, crossing his legs and resting his forearms on his knees. "Yates Tucker," he said, not offering his hand, but nodding his head in greeting. "Most folks call me Yates." "Rose Harper," she replied, sitting up as well and brushing grass from her hair. "Most folks call me Rose, though my father prefers Rosemary when he is angry with me." "Which is often, I am guessing, if you are out here alone instead of in town where proper young ladies belong," Yates said, but there was no judgment in his tone, only observation. "Every day of my life," Rose said, with a bitter laugh. "I am a terrible disappointment. I read too much, talk too much, think too much. I ask questions that ladies should not ask. I want to see things beyond Tombstone, beyond Arizona. I want to understand how the world works, why people do the things they do." She stopped abruptly, horrified at herself. "I apologize. I do not know why I am telling you this." Yates pulled a blade of grass and twisted it between his fingers. "Because I am a stranger, and strangers are the safest people to tell secrets to. We do not have to see each other again if we do not want to." The thought of never seeing him again made Rose's chest ache unexpectedly. "What brings you to Tombstone?" she asked, changing the subject. "Work," Yates said simply. "I have been drifting since I was 17. Worked cattle drives, served as a deputy in a few towns, tried my hand at prospecting. Nothing stuck. Heard Tombstone was growing. Thought there might be opportunities here." He looked at her sideways. "What about you? Born here?" "Born in Missouri," Rose said. "My mother died when I was 7, and my father moved us out here when he heard about the silver strikes. He runs a general store on Allen Street. Does well enough." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "Well enough that he has attracted the attention of Luther Graves, who wants a young wife to manage his household and give him sons, never mind that his last 2 wives died in childbirth." Yates's expression darkened. "And your father agreed to this?" "My father sees only the financial advantage of aligning himself with one of the wealthiest men in Cochise County," Rose said flatly. "He does not see me. He has never seen me. I am a commodity to be traded. Nothing more." "When is this wedding supposed to happen?" Yates asked, his voice carefully neutral. "September 30th, Rose said. 3 weeks from tomorrow." Yates was quiet for a long moment, staring out across the prairie. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "That is not much time," he said finally. "Time for what?" Rose asked. He looked at her directly, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "To figure out another option." "There is no other option," Rose said, though her heart was racing. "I have no money of my own, no skills that would allow me to support myself. I cannot simply run away. Where would I go? How would I live? There are always options," Yates said firmly. "Maybe not easy ones, maybe not safe ones, but they exist." He stood up, offering her his hand. "It is getting late. I should get you back to town before your father sends out a search party." Rose took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip as he pulled her to her feet. She found herself standing very close to him, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, close enough to smell leather and sage and something else, something distinctly him. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. "You do not know me." "No," Yates agreed, not stepping back. "But I know what it is like to feel trapped. I know what it is like to want more than what you have been given." He released her hand slowly. "And I think maybe you are the kind of person worth knowing." Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Yates was looking at her now, as though she was more than just a burden or a bargaining chip. "My horse is tied near those rocks," she managed to say, pointing to a cluster of boulders about 50 yards away. They walked together in silence, the prairie grass whispering around their legs. Rose's mare, a gray named Delilah, nickered softly as they approached. Yates's horse, a tall bay gelding, stood nearby, his reins dangling. "You let him ground tie," Rose observed. "That takes training." "Had him since he was a colt," Yates said, running a hand down the horse's neck. "Raised him myself. His name is Flint." He moved to help Rose mount, placing his hands on her waist and lifting her into the saddle with an ease that suggested he was far stronger than his lean frame indicated. The ride back to Tombstone was slow, both of them seeming reluctant to reach their destination. The sun dipped lower, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. As they crested the hill overlooking the town, Rose could see the lights beginning to flicker on in windows, could hear the distant sounds of a piano playing in one of the saloons. "Where are you staying?" Rose asked as they guided their horses down the dusty main street. "Got a room at the boarding house on 4th Street, Yates said. "Nothing fancy, but it will do until I figure out what comes next." They stopped in front of Harper's General Store, a 2-story building with living quarters above. Rose could see light in the upstairs windows, could imagine her father pacing, working himself into a fury over her absence. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking down at Yates from her saddle. For watching the clouds with me, for listening. Yates reached up and his fingers brushed hers where they rested on the saddle horn. Can I see you again? He asked. Rose's heart leaped, but reality crashed down just as quickly. It would not be wise. My father has already made his decision, and Luther Graves is not a man who takes kindly to anyone interfering with what he considers his property. I am not afraid of Luther Graves, Yates said, his jaw set. Maybe you should be, Rose said, but she was smiling despite herself. He has money, influence, and men who do his bidding without question. And I have a stubborn streak and a fairly accurate aim, Yates replied. Those have gotten me through worse situations than a rich man with an ego. Before Rose could respond, the door to the store flew open and her father emerged, his face red with anger. Thomas Harper was a thick-set man of 50 with graying hair and a perpetual scowl. Rosemary Louise Harper, where in God's name have you been? He bellowed. It is nearly dark, and you out riding alone like some common... He stopped when he noticed Yates. Who is this? Yates Tucker, sir, Yates said, his tone respectful but not deferential. I encountered your daughter out on the prairie and escorted her back to ensure her safety. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Escorted her back, did you? And what exactly was she doing out on the prairie that required escorting? Enjoying the afternoon, I believe, Yates said easily. No harm done. No harm done, Thomas repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He grabbed Delilah's bridle. Get down, Rosemary. Now. He glared at Yates. And you, Mr. Tucker, can be on your way. My daughter does not require your services. Rose dismounted quickly, not wanting to cause more trouble. She glanced at Yates, trying to convey with her eyes what she could not say aloud, that she wanted to see him again, that something had shifted in her world the moment he lay down beside her in the grass, that she was terrified and hopeful all at once. Yates tipped his hat to her, a gesture that somehow felt intimate despite its formality. Miss Harper, he said, and then to her father. Mr. Harper, good evening. He turned flint and rode off into the gathering darkness. Thomas grabbed Rose's arm and hauled her into the store, slamming the door behind them. What were you thinking? He hissed. You are engaged to be married, and you are out cavorting with strange men? I was not cavorting, Rose said, wrenching her arm free. I went for a ride, and I happened to meet someone. That is all. That is all? Thomas's face was nearly purple now. Do you have any idea what people will say if they hear about this? Do you know how hard I have worked to secure this match with Mr. Graves? He could have any woman in the territory, and he chose you despite your difficult nature and your unfortunate habit of speaking your mind. How fortunate for me, Rose said bitterly. Thomas raised his hand and Rose flinched, but the blow did not come. Instead, her father lowered his arms slowly, breathing hard. You will not leave this house again until the wedding, he said coldly. You will stay in your room, you will work on your trousseau, and you will prepare yourself to be a dutiful wife. Do you understand me? Perfectly, Rose said, lifting her chin. May I go to my room now? Go, Thomas said, waving his hand dismissively. And do not think I will not be watching. One more incident like this, and I will move the wedding up to next week. Rose climbed the stairs to her small bedroom, her mind racing. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks until her life became a prison, 3 weeks to figure out if there was any other path available to her. She lit the oil lamp on her bedside table and sat down on the edge of her bed, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. The image of Yates lying beside her in the grass kept playing in her mind. The way he had looked at her, the way he had listened to her without judgment or condescension, the way his hand had felt when he helped her mount her horse. She barely knew him, and yet she felt more seen and understood by him than by anyone she had known her entire life. Rose pulled out the small journal she kept hidden under her mattress and began to write by lamplight, pouring out her thoughts and fears and the strange, unexpected hope that had bloomed in her chest. She wrote about the clouds, about Yates's gray-blue eyes, about the terrible choice between a loveless marriage and a perilous unknown. She wrote until her hand cramped and the lamp oil ran low, and even then she was not sure she had captured the full weight of what she was feeling. The next morning, Rose woke to find her father had made good on his threat. Her bedroom door was locked from the outside. She tried the handle several times, then knocked loudly. "Father, let me out," she called. "Me out." She, "You will stay there until you learn your place." Thomas's voice came from the other side of the door. "I will bring you meals and you will work on your sewing. That is all." Rose pressed her forehead against the wood, fighting back tears of frustration. Her room was not large: a bed, a dresser, a small desk, and a window that overlooked the back alley. She went to the window and pushed it open, looking down. It was about a 15-foot drop to the ground, not impossible, but dangerous enough that she would risk breaking a leg if she attempted it. She spent the day pacing, reading from her limited collection of books and staring out the window. Her father brought her breakfast and lunch on a tray, setting them inside the door without speaking to her, then locking her in again immediately. By evening, Rose felt like she might crawl out of her skin with restlessness and anger. As darkness fell, she heard a soft sound at her window. She looked up from her book to see a small pebble bounce off the glass. Rose rushed to the window and looked down to see Yates standing in the alley below, his face shadowed by his hat. Her heart leaped into her throat. She pushed the window open wider and leaned out. "What are you doing here?" she whispered as loudly as she dared. "Checking on you," Yates said. "I heard in town today that your father has you locked up. Is that true?" "Yes," Rose said, glancing nervously at her bedroom door. "He says I am not to leave until the wedding." Yates's expression hardened. "That is not right, Rose. You are a person, not a prisoner." "Tell that to my father," Rose said bitterly. "Or to Luther Graves, who apparently paid a significant sum for the privilege of marrying me." Yates was quiet for a moment, looking up at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Do you want to get out of here?" he asked finally. "What do you mean?" Rose asked, though her pulse was already quickening. "I mean, do you want to leave?" Yates said. "Tonight, right now, I can help you." Rose stared at him, her mind spinning. "And go where? Do what?" "I have no money, Yates. I have nowhere to go." "You could come with me," Yates said. "I am leaving Tombstone in the morning anyway. There is a ranch about 50 miles north that is hiring hands for the season. I was going to head up there, see if I could get work. You could come along, find work in the nearby town, start over." "It is not that simple," Rose said, though every fiber of her being wanted to say yes, wanted to climb out that window and never look back. "If I run away, my father will come after me, and Luther Graves will not take kindly to being jilted. They will search for me. Then we will go somewhere they would not think to look," Yates said. "California, maybe, or up into Colorado. Somewhere you can be free, Rose. Somewhere you can be yourself." Rose closed her eyes, torn between terror and longing. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You barely know me, and yet you are offering to upend your life to help me. Why?" Yates took off his hat, running his hand through his dark hair. "Because when I saw you lying in that grass yesterday, watching the clouds, you looked like the freest person I had ever seen," he said. "And the thought of that freedom being taken away from you, of you being handed over to some old man who sees you as property, it made me sick. I cannot stand by and let that happen if there is anything I can do to prevent it." Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," Yates said gently, "but you have to ask yourself which is more frightening, taking a chance on the unknown or spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been." Rose wiped her eyes, her mind made up. "How do I get down?" "Can you tie sheets together?" Yates asked. "Make a rope?" Rose looked around her room. She had 3 sheets, plus a quilt. Yes, she said. Give me 10 minutes. She worked quickly and quietly, knotting the sheets together with the knots her father had taught her years ago when he still thought she might be useful. She tied one end to the leg of her heavy iron bed frame and tested it with her weight. It held. She gathered her few precious belongings, her journal, a daguerreotype of her mother, a change of clothes, her grandmother's locket. Everything went into a small canvas bag. Rose changed from her nightgown into her riding clothes, braided her long auburn hair, and took one last look around the room that had been her prison. Then she threw the sheet rope out the window and climbed onto the sill. The descent was terrifying. Rose's arms shook as she lowered herself hand over hand, her boots scraping against the wooden siding. Halfway down, she heard a ripping sound and her heart stopped, but the sheets held. Then Yates's hands were on her waist, steadying her, guiding her the last few feet to the ground. Are you all right? He asked, his voice low and urgent. Rose nodded, unable to speak. Her whole body was trembling, from fear or excitement or both. My horse is down the alley, Yates said, taking her bag. We will ride double until we are clear of town, then we can figure out the next step. They moved quickly through the shadows, avoiding the main streets where late-night revelers spilled out of saloons and gambling halls. Flint waited where Yates had left him, calm and patient. Yates mounted first, then pulled Rose up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing close to his back, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Hold tight, Yates murmured. And then they were moving, walking at first through the quiet back streets, then trotting once they reached the edge of town, and finally cantering when they hit the open desert, the lights of Tombstone fading behind them. Rose rested her cheek against Yates's back, feeling the night air rush past them, cold and exhilarating. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had chosen herself, chosen freedom, chosen the possibility of something more. The terror was still there, coiled in her stomach, but it was accompanied by something else now, a wild, fierce joy. They rode for hours through the moonlit desert, following trails that Yates seemed to know by instinct. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, he guided Flint into a small canyon where a thin stream trickled between rocks and a few scraggly cottonwood trees provided shelter. We will rest here for a few hours, Yates said, dismounting and helping Rose down. Let Flint drink and recover. Then we will push on. Rose's legs felt like water after so long in the saddle. She stumbled and Yates caught her, steadying her with his hands on her shoulders. Easy, he said. Sit down before you fall down. Rose sank onto a flat rock near the stream, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was fading, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. What have I done? She whispered, staring at her hands. Yates crouched in front of her, his eyes searching her face. You have taken control of your own life, he said firmly. That is what you have done. My father will be furious, Rose said. Luther Graves will be furious. They will look for me, Yates. They will not just let this go. Let them look, Yates said. By the time they realize you are gone, we will be long gone. And even if they do come after us, they have no idea which direction we headed. We could be anywhere. Rose looked up at him, this man she had known for less than 2 days, who had already changed the entire course of her life. Why are you really doing this? She asked. Please tell me the truth. Yates sat back on his heels, considering. When I was 18, I watched my sister marry a man she did not love because my father said it was the right match, he said slowly. She was miserable. 3 years later, she died having her second child. I always wondered if things might have been different if someone had helped her escape, given her another option. He met Rose's eyes. I could not help her, but I can help you. Rose felt fresh tears burning behind her eyes. I am sorry about your sister, she said softly. Me too, Yates said. He stood up, offering her his hand again. Come on, you should try to rest. We have a long ride ahead of us. He spread out his bedroll under one of the cottonwood trees, and Rose lay down, too tired to argue about propriety. Yates sat with his back against the tree trunk, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. Rose watched him through half-closed eyes, studying the strong lines of his profile, the way the early morning light caught in his hair. Yates, she said quietly. Yeah? Thank you, Rose said. For everything. He looked down at her, and the softness in his expression made her heart flutter. You are welcome, Rose, he said. Now sleep. I will wake you when it is time to move on. Rose closed her eyes, listening to the gentle burble of the stream, the morning songs of desert birds, and the steady, reassuring presence of Yates keeping watch. Despite everything, despite the uncertainty and danger ahead, she felt safe. More than that, she felt alive in a way she had never experienced before. When Yates woke her 3 hours later, the sun was climbing high and hot in the sky. He handed her a canteen and some jerky from his saddlebags. We need to move, he said. I want to put as much distance as possible between us and Tombstone before nightfall. They rode hard through the heat of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and refill the canteen at a small spring Yates knew about. Rose's muscles ached from riding double, and her face was burned from the sun despite her bonnet, but she did not complain. This was her choice, her adventure, and she would endure whatever came with it. As evening approached, they reached a tiny settlement that barely qualified as a town. 6 buildings clustered around a crossroads, including a general store and a small stable. Yates helped Rose dismount behind the stable, where they would not be easily visible from the road. Wait here, he said. I am going to see about getting you a horse and some supplies. Rose nodded, too tired to speak. She watched him walk away, moving with an easy confidence that she envied. While he was gone, she splashed water from the stable trough on her face and tried to make herself presentable. Yates returned 20 minutes later, leading a mare. The horse was not particularly pretty, a rough-coated buckskin with a Roman nose, but her eyes were kind and her legs looked sound. Her name is Biscuit, Yates said, handing Rose the reins. The stable owner says she is steady and sure-footed. She will do for now. How much did she cost? Rose asked, worried. Do not concern yourself with that, Yates said. I have enough saved to get us through for a while. We will figure out the rest as we go. They mounted up on their respective horses and continued north, riding side by side now. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. The air grew cooler as the sun set, and Rose found herself actually shivering after the intense heat of the day. Yates noticed and immediately called a halt. We will make camp here, he said, pointing to a sheltered spot between 2 large boulders. Get a fire going, warm you up. As Yates tended to the horses, Rose gathered kindling. She had never made a fire on her own before, but she had watched others do it countless times. It took her several tries and a few blisters on her fingers before she got a small flame going, but the surge of pride she felt when the fire finally caught and held was worth the effort. Well done, Yates said, coming to sit beside her. He pulled out more jerky and some hardtack from his saddlebags, along with a battered tin of peaches. Not much of a dinner, but it will keep us going. They ate in companionable silence, sharing the peaches straight from the tin. Rose could not remember food ever tasting so good, even though it was simple and sparse. When they finished, Yates poured them each a cup of coffee from the pot he had set over the fire. Can I ask you something? Rose said, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. Anything, Yates replied. What happened to your family? Your parents, I mean, after your sister died? Yates stared into the fire, his expression distant. My mother passed when I was young, same as yours. My father remarried a year later to a woman who had no interest in raising another woman's children. My older brother took over the family farm. I left as soon as I was old enough to make my own way. He took a sip of coffee. Have not been back since. Not sure I ever will. Do you miss them? Rose asked. Sometimes, Yates admitted. I miss what we were before everything fell apart. But that family does not exist anymore, if it ever really did. Sometimes I think we build up our memories of home into something better than they actually were. Rose nodded slowly. I think you are right. I have been so focused on escaping Tombstone that I never stopped to think about whether I had anything there worth missing. And the truth is, I do not. My father sees me as a burden. I have no close friends because most women in town think I am strange. The only thing I will miss is the sky, the space, the freedom to ride when I could. You will have all of that where we are going, Yates said. More of it than you have ever had before. Where exactly are we going? Rose asked. You mentioned a ranch, but I realized I do not actually know where. Place called the Triple Creek Ranch, Yates said. It is up near the Mogollon Rim, about a week's ride from here if we do not push too hard. The owner, Gus Thornton, is always looking for good hands, and the nearest town, Pine Valley, is big enough that you could find work there, maybe at a hotel or restaurant. It is not California or Colorado, but it is far enough from Tombstone that your father and Graves will not think to look there. And after that, Rose asked, do we just keep running for the rest of our lives? Yates turned to look at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. I do not know, Rose, he said honestly. I have never planned more than a few weeks ahead in my entire life. But I figure as long as we keep moving, keep our heads down, eventually your father will give up the search. Men like Luther Graves have too much pride to chase after a woman who ran away from him. They move on to easier targets. Rose hoped he was right, but she could not shake the feeling that she had not heard the last of Luther Graves. They took turns keeping watch that night, each sleeping in 4-hour shifts while the other stayed alert. When it was Rose's turn to stand guard, she sat with Yates's rifle across her lap, staring up at the stars and thinking about everything that had happened in the past 2 days. 48 hours ago, she had been resigned to her fate, preparing to marry a man she did not love and live a life that would slowly suffocate her. Now she was sitting in the wilderness with a cowboy she barely knew, running toward an uncertain future, and she felt more herself than she ever had. The next several days fell into a rhythm. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and grab quick meals. They avoided towns and well-traveled roads, sticking to game trails and hidden paths that Yates seemed to know instinctively. At night, they camped under the stars, and Rose gradually learned the skills she would need to survive in this new life. How to hobble a horse properly, how to read the land for water sources, how to cook over an open fire, how to load and fire Yates's spare pistol. Yates proved to be a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish for her ignorance. And slowly, as they traveled, Rose began to see past the cowboy exterior to the man beneath. Yates was smart, far smarter than he gave himself credit for. He knew about plants and animals, about weather patterns and navigation by the stars. He could quote poetry he had memorized from books borrowed from libraries in various towns. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh at unexpected moments. And he was kind, not in a showy way, but in small, quiet gestures, making sure she had the warmest blanket at night, positioning himself between her and any potential danger, saving the best bits of their meager meals for her, listening when she talked about her dreams and fears without trying to fix everything or tell her she was wrong to feel the way she did. Rose found herself watching him more and more, noticing things, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused, the unconscious grace with which he moved, the gentle way he handled the horses, the strength in his hands when he lifted her down from her saddle each evening. She found herself wondering what it would be like to be held by those hands, to be kissed by him, to be loved by him. The thought startled her with their intensity. She had never felt this way about anyone before, certainly not about Luther Graves, who had looked at her like she was a possession to be acquired. But Yates looked at her like she was a person, like she mattered, like her thoughts and feelings and desires were important. On the fifth night of their journey, they made camp near a small lake nestled in the pines. The air was cool and clean, scented with juniper and pine resin. Rose knelt by the water's edge, splashing her face and neck, wishing she could fully bathe, but knowing it was not practical. "There is a better spot around the other side," Yates said, coming to stand beside her. "More sheltered. If you wanted to wash up properly, I could keep watch from camp. Make sure no one bothers you." Rose looked up at him, surprised and touched by his thoughtfulness. "Are you sure? I do not want to put you out." "You are not putting me out," Yates said. "We have been riding hard for days. You deserve a chance to feel clean." Rose gathered her spare clothes and a small piece of soap she had bought at the general store where they got biscuit, and Yates showed her the spot he had mentioned, a small cove where the water was deep enough to actually submerge herself, surrounded by thick brush that provided privacy. The water was shockingly cold, fed by mountain runoff, but Rose did not care. She scrubbed days of trail dust and sweat from her skin and hair, feeling almost human again. When she finally emerged, shivering, and pulled on her clean clothes, she felt renewed in a way that went beyond mere physical cleanliness. She found Yates sitting by the fire, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes, something that made Rose's stomach flutter. "Better?" he asked. "Much," Rose said, sitting down across from him. She began combing through her wet hair with her fingers, trying to work out the tangles. "Here," Yates said, moving to sit behind her. "Let me help." Before Rose could protest, his fingers were in her hair, gently working through the snarls with a patience that made her eyes sting with unexpected emotion. His touch was careful, almost reverent, and Rose found herself relaxing into it, her eyes drifting closed. "My sister had hair like yours," Yates said quietly. "Auburn, thick. She used to make me help her brush it out when we were children, said I was gentler than our mother's maid." "What was her name?" Rose asked softly. "Margaret," Yates said. "Maggie, we called her. She was 3 years older than me, and she was the best person I have ever known. Kind, smart, funny. She deserved so much better than what she got." "I am sure she knew you loved her," Rose said. "I hope so," Yates said, his hands stilled in her hair. "Rose, I need to tell you something." Rose's heart began to race. "What is it?" "These past few days, traveling with you, talking with you, I have felt something I have never felt before," Yates said. His voice was rough, uncertain. "I cannot stop thinking about you. When you are near me, I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in my life. When you are out of my sight, I worry. And when you smile at me, I feel like I could take on the whole world and win." Rose turned to face him, her breath catching in her throat. "Yates," she whispered. "I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know you barely know me, and you have just escaped one situation where you had no choice. The last thing I want is to make you feel pressured or obligated in any way. But I had to tell you. I had to be honest about what I am feeling." Rose reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the roughness of his stubble under her palms. "I feel it too," she said. "I have been trying to tell myself it is just gratitude, or the excitement of the adventure, or the fear making me cling to you. But it is none of those things. It is you, Yates. It is the way you see me, the way you listen to me, the way you make me feel like I matter." Yates closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "You do matter, Rose. You matter more than you could possibly know." "Then kiss me," Rose said. "Please kiss me." Yates opened his eyes, searching her face for any sign of hesitation or doubt. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, to pull away. But Rose did not pull away. She met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, exploring. Then something shifted. Yates's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Rose melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent and hungry, all the tension and longing of the past days finally finding release. Rose had been kissed before, awkward stolen kisses from boys in Tombstone, but those had been nothing like this. This was fire and rightness, and coming home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Rose Harper," he said. "I know it is fast. I know it is crazy, but it is true." "It is not crazy," Rose said, her voice shaking, "because I am falling in love with you too." They held each other by the firelight, neither speaking, both simply existing in the moment, in the miracle of having found each other against all odds. Eventually, they lay down together on Yates's bedroll, Rose tucked against his chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. They did not do more than hold each other, both understanding without words that there was no rush, that they had time now, that what was growing between them deserved to be nurtured and cherished. Rose listened to the steady beat of Yates's heart and felt, for the first time in her life, truly safe and truly loved. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would face, she knew they would face them together. And that made all the difference. They reached the Triple Creek Ranch 6 days later, 2 days ahead of Yates's estimate because the weather held and the trails were clear. The ranch sprawled across a wide valley, surrounded by ponderosa pines and red rock cliffs. Cattle grazed in green pastures, and Rose could see several barns, a large main house and a bunkhouse in the distance. Yates spoke with the foreman, a grizzled older man named Pete, who looked him up and down critically before agreeing to give him a trial period. "We will see how you do with the herd," Pete said. "If you are any good, you can stay on through the winter. If not, you will be on your way before the first snow." "Fair enough," Yates said, shaking the man's hand. Rose and Yates rode into Pine Valley that afternoon, a town considerably larger than Tombstone, with actual paved streets and brick buildings. They stopped at a boarding house run by a cheerful widow named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at Rose's road-weary appearance and offered her a room at a fair price. "I can always use help with the cooking and cleaning," Mrs. Patterson said. "If you are looking for work, that is. In exchange, I could reduce your room and board rates." Rose accepted gratefully, relieved to have both shelter and employment so quickly. That evening, after she had settled into her small but clean room, Yates came to say goodbye before returning to the ranch. "I will come into town every Sunday," he promised, standing in the doorway. "That is the day the hands get off, assuming there is no emergency with the herd. We can spend the day together." "I will count the hours," Rose said, and she meant it. Yates pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly, not caring if anyone saw. "I love you, Rose Harper," he said against her lips. "I love you too, Yates Tucker," Rose replied, and the words felt like a vow, like a promise of everything to come. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Rose's life. She threw herself into her work at the boarding house, learning from Mrs. Patterson how to cook for large groups, how to manage accounts, how to deal with difficult guests. The older woman became almost like a mother to her, kind but firm, teaching her practical skills Rose had never learned in her father's house. Every Sunday, true to his word, Yates rode into town. They would spend the day together, walking through Pine Valley, sharing meals, talking for hours. Yates told her about life on the ranch, about the other hands, about the work of herding cattle and mending fences. Rose told him about the guests at the boarding house, about the books she was reading from the town's small library, about her dreams for the future. They also spent time simply being together, sitting in comfortable silence, holding hands, stealing kisses when no one was watching. Their relationship deepened with each passing week, moving beyond the initial rush of attraction into something more solid and enduring. They learned each other's quirks and habits, their fears and hopes, their pasts and their dreams for the future. 2 months after they arrived in Pine Valley, on a crisp October Sunday, Yates proposed. They were walking along the river that ran through town, the aspens turning gold around them, when Yates suddenly stopped and turned to face her. "Rose, I do not have much to offer you," he said, taking both of her hands in his. "I am just a cowboy with a horse and a bedroll and whatever money I can save from my wages. But I can promise you that I will love you for the rest of my life. I can promise that I will never try to cage you or change you. I can promise that whatever we build together, we will build as partners, as equals." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Rose's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely, yes." Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, and Rose did not care that it was plain, that there was no diamond, that it had probably cost him a month's wages. It was perfect because it came from him, because it represented their choice, their love, their commitment to each other. They were married 3 weeks later in Pine Valley's small church, with Mrs. Patterson and several of the ranch hands serving as witnesses. Rose wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, and Yates wore his best shirt and a string tie. It was not a grand affair, but Rose had never been happier, standing beside Yates and speaking her vows, promising to love and honor him for all the days of her life. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Yates kissed her, Rose felt like she was finally, truly home. They rented a small cabin on the outskirts of Pine Valley, close enough that Rose could continue working at the boarding house and Yates could easily ride to the ranch. It was tiny, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. They spent their first night as husband and wife making love by firelight, learning each other's bodies with gentleness and passion, whispering words of love and devotion. Rose had been nervous, not knowing what to expect, but Yates was patient and tender, putting her comfort and pleasure above his own. And when they finally came together, Rose felt a completeness she had never imagined possible, a joining that was physical and emotional and spiritual all at once. Afterwards, lying in Yates's arms, Rose traced patterns on his bare chest and marveled at how far she had come from that afternoon in the grass outside Tombstone. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not lain down beside me that day?" she asked softly. "All the time," Yates admitted, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And every time I do, I thank God that I made that choice, that I was in that place at that time, that I was given the chance to know you." "Do you think we are safe here?" Rose asked, voicing the fear that still occasionally woke her in the night. "Do you think they have stopped looking for me?" "I think enough time has passed that your father has moved on," Yates said. "And I think Luther Graves's pride would never allow him to admit that a woman ran away from him. As far as anyone in Tombstone is concerned, you probably ran off with some no-good drifter and came to a bad end. They have no reason to think we are here, living quiet lives, hurting no one." Rose wanted to believe him. She did believe him mostly, but there was still a small part of her that worried, that waited for the other shoe to drop. As it turned out, her worry was not entirely unfounded. It was a cold January afternoon, nearly 5 months after their wedding, when a stranger rode into Pine Valley. Rose was in the boarding house kitchen, preparing dinner, when Mrs. Patterson came to find her, her face pale and worried. "Rose, dear, there is a man asking questions in town," she said quietly. "Asking about a young woman matching your description, traveling with a cowboy. He is showing a picture around, offering money for information." Rose's heart stopped. "Did you see him? Did you see the picture?" "I did," Mrs. Patterson said. "It looks like you, Rose. Not exactly, but close enough." Rose sank into a chair, her mind racing. "What do I do?" she whispered. "First, you stay calm," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Second, you get word to Yates. And third, you both need to decide whether you are going to run or stand your ground. Rose sent one of the stable boys to the ranch with an urgent message for Yates. He arrived 2 hours later, his face grim. Rose told him everything Mrs. Patterson had said. Did she say what the man looked like? Yates asked. Tall, well-dressed, expensive horse, Mrs. Patterson said. He carried himself like someone used to having money and power. Luther Graves, Rose said, her voice hollow. It has to be. Maybe, Yates said, or someone hired by your father. Either way, we need to be smart about this. He took Rose's hands, looking into her eyes. The question is, do you want to run again? Because we can. We can be on the road in an hour. Head west into California or north into Wyoming. Start over somewhere new. Rose thought about it, thought about the life they had built here, the friends they had made, the peace they had found. She thought about the cabin, their home. She thought about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, always waiting for someone from her past to catch up with them. No, she said firmly. I am tired of running. I am tired of being afraid. This is our home now. We have done nothing wrong. I will not let them take this from us. Yates's expression was a mixture of pride and worry. You know, if we stay, there could be a confrontation. Things could get ugly. I know, Rose said, but you will be with me, and that makes all the difference. They decided to face the threat head-on. Yates made inquiries and learned that the stranger was indeed staying at the hotel in town, asking questions, showing the picture. His name was Silas Carter, and he claimed to be a private investigator hired by Thomas Harper to locate his missing daughter. The next morning, Rose and Yates walked into the hotel together. They found Silas Carter in the dining room, eating breakfast. He was indeed tall and well-dressed, with sharp eyes and a calculating expression. Mr. Carter, Yates said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. I understand you have been asking about my wife. Carter looked up, his gaze sweeping over them both. His eyes lingered on Rose, and she saw recognition flash across his face. Mrs. Tucker, I presume, he said. Or should I say Miss Harper? It is Mrs. Tucker, Rose said, lifting her chin. I am legally married. The certificate is on file in this town. Be that as it may, your father has been very worried about you, Carter said. He hired me to find you and ascertain your safety. As you can see, I am perfectly safe, Rose said, and I am not going back to Tombstone. Your father would very much like to speak with you, Carter said. And Mr. Luther Graves has made it clear that he expects compensation for the breach of your engagement contract. There was no contract, Rose said hotly. There was an arrangement made between two men without my consent or knowledge. I was never consulted, never asked what I wanted. That is not a contract, Mr. Carter. That is a transaction, and I am not goods to be bought and sold. Carter's expression remained neutral. That may be your perspective, Miss Harper, but the law might see things differently. You took items from your father's house when you left. Some might call that theft. Some might call it a daughter taking what belonged to her, Yates said, his tone dangerous now. Her clothes, her mother's locket, a few personal items. Nothing of significant value. Nevertheless, your father wants you to return, Carter said, and I have been authorized to use whatever means necessary to ensure that happens. That sounds like a threat, Yates said, his hand moving to rest on his pistol. It is simply a statement of fact, Carter said. He pulled out a legal document and slid it across the table. This is a warrant for your arrest, Miss Harper, issued by the Territorial Court in Cochise County. You are wanted for theft and breach of contract. I have the authority to take you back to Tombstone to face these charges. Rose felt the blood drain from her face. That warrant is not legitimate, she said, but her voice shook. My father has no grounds to charge me with theft. Perhaps not, Carter said, but it will take months for that to be sorted out through the courts. Months that you will spend in custody, awaiting trial. Unless, of course, you agree to come peacefully and speak with your father. Perhaps an arrangement can be made. What kind of arrangement? Yates asked, though his jaw was clenched. Return what was taken, formally apologize to Mr. Graves for the embarrassment caused by your flight, and your father might be willing to drop the charges, Carter said. You could even remain married to your cowboy if you wish. Your father simply wants to see you, to know that you are safe, to have some closure to this unfortunate situation. Rose looked at Yates, trying to read his expression. She knew what he was thinking, that this was a trap, that if she went back to Tombstone, she would never leave again, that her father would find some way to annul her marriage and force her into the union with Luther Graves despite everything. But she also knew that if she did not go, if she did not at least attempt to resolve this legally, they would spend the rest of their lives as fugitives. Yates would never be able to work openly. They would never be able to settle anywhere for long, and eventually they would be caught. I will go, Rose said finally, but only if Yates comes with me, and only if we have a lawyer present for any discussions with my father. Carter considered this. That is acceptable, he said. Though I warn you, Mr. Tucker, if you attempt to interfere with my bringing Miss Harper back to Tombstone, I will have you arrested as well for aiding a fugitive. Her name is Mrs. Tucker, Yates said coldly, and I am not letting her go anywhere without me. They left Pine Valley the next morning, Rose and Yates riding side by side, with Silas Carter following close behind. The journey back to Tombstone took a week, and every mile made Rose's anxiety grow. She had not seen her father in nearly 6 months. She had no idea what she would say to him, how she would explain her actions in a way he might possibly understand. Yates stayed close to her throughout the journey, his presence a constant source of comfort and strength. At night, when they camped, he held her and whispered reassurances, reminding her that she was not alone, that whatever happened, he would be by her side. They arrived in Tombstone on a gray afternoon in late January. The town looked exactly as Rose remembered it, dusty and rough and full of hard men living hard lives. Carter led them straight to the courthouse, where a lawyer named Samuel Bennett was waiting. Your father hired me to represent his interests in this matter, Bennett explained, shaking Rose's hand. However, I have also taken the liberty of securing independent counsel for you, at no charge. Mr. Jacob Walsh is one of the finest attorneys in the territory. He is waiting inside. Rose was surprised and grateful. She had expected her father to try to steamroll her, to present her with a fait accompli. The fact that he had arranged for her to have her own lawyer suggested that perhaps he was willing to negotiate in good faith. Or perhaps, she thought cynically, he simply wanted everything to appear legal and proper so that she would have no grounds to challenge whatever agreement they reached. Jacob Walsh turned out to be a serious young man in his early 30s with intelligent eyes and a forthright manner. He listened carefully as Rose explained the situation, her father's arrangement with Luther Graves, her escape with Yates, her marriage, the months they had spent building a life in Pine Valley. Your father cannot simply force you to return to him or to marry Mr. Graves, Walsh said. You are an adult woman, and you entered into a legal marriage of your own free will. However, the theft charge could be problematic if your father can demonstrate that you took items of significant value without permission. I took some clothes, some books, and a locket that belonged to my mother, Rose said. Nothing more. Then we should be able to resolve this fairly easily, Walsh said. Let me speak with your father and Mr. Bennett. I will see what they are truly after. The meeting took place in a conference room at the courthouse. Rose sat between Yates and Walsh, her hands folded in her lap, trying to appear calm even though her heart was racing. Across the table sat her father, looking older and more tired than she remembered, and Luther Graves, his face like carved stone, his eyes cold and calculating. Rosemary, Thomas Harper said, and his voice cracked slightly. You are well? I am well, Father, Rose said, surprised by the emotion in his voice. I am married now. I am happy. Thomas looked at Yates, his expression unreadable. This is the man who helped you run away. This is the man who helped me escape a fate I did not choose and did not want, Rose corrected gently. His name is Yates Tucker, and he is my husband. Luther Graves made a disgusted sound. This is absurd, Harper. Your daughter broke her word, destroyed my reputation, and made me a laughingstock. I want compensation, not this sentimental reunion. You want compensation for what exactly? Walsh asked calmly. My client never agreed to marry you, Mr. Graves. She never signed any contract, never gave her consent. Any arrangement that existed was solely between you and her father, and had no legal binding on her. I spent considerable money preparing for that wedding, Graves said, his face reddening. I bought a ring. I made arrangements. I turned down other potential matches. Her flight caused me significant financial and social damages, which you would be welcome to sue Mr. Harper for, since he was the one who made promises on his daughter's behalf without securing her agreement, Walsh said. But Mrs. Tucker bears no responsibility for your poor business decisions. Rose felt a surge of admiration for her lawyer. He was cutting through Graves's bluster with precision and calm logic. Now, as for the theft charges, Walsh continued, Mrs. Tucker took only personal items that any reasonable person would consider to belong to her. Unless you can demonstrate that these items were of significant monetary value, Mr. Harper, you have no grounds for criminal charges. Thomas Harper was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. The locket was valuable, he said quietly. It was solid gold, with diamonds, worth at least $500. Rose felt cold shock wash over her. That is not true, she said. Mother's locket was simple gold, with my grandmother's picture inside. There were no diamonds. Are you calling your father a liar? Bennett asked sharply. I am saying he is mistaken, Rose said, meeting her father's eyes. Or he is deliberately misrepresenting the facts to give himself leverage in this negotiation. For a moment, something flickered in Thomas's expression. Guilt, Rose asked softly. Then why did you put it in a box in the attic and never look at it after she died? Rose asked softly. Why did you remarry 6 months later and never speak her name again? You did not value that locket, Father. You did not value her memory. And you certainly have never valued me. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Thomas Harper's face went through several emotions: anger, denial, and finally something that might have been sorrow. I did the best I could, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. After your mother died, I was lost. I did not know how to be a father to a daughter. I thought providing for you, keeping you safe, finding you a good match, that was what fathers did. But you never asked me what I wanted, Rose said. You never saw me as a person with my own thoughts and dreams and desires. You saw me as a problem to be solved, a burden to be passed on to someone else. Thomas was silent. Mr. Harper, Walsh said gently, I think we all know there is no legitimate theft charge here. Your daughter took items that belonged to her, and she left to escape a situation she found intolerable. She has built a new life, a good life. She is married to a man who loves and respects her. The kindest thing you could do now would be to let her go with your blessing. And what about my compensation? Luther Graves demanded. You will receive nothing, Walsh said flatly. You have no legal claim, and frankly, Mr. Graves, your pursuit of this matter is bordering on harassment. If you continue to make trouble for my client, I will have no choice but to file countercharges for false imprisonment and emotional distress. Graves opened his mouth to argue, but Thomas Harper held up his hand. Enough, he said wearily. He looked at Rose, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. You are happy? He asked. I am, Rose said. Truly happy, Father. For the first time in my life. Thomas nodded slowly. He pulled a paper from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. I have already signed this, he said. It releases you from any obligation to me, acknowledges your marriage as legitimate, and withdraws any criminal charges. All you need to do is sign it as well, and this matter is concluded. Rose picked up the paper, scanning it quickly. It was exactly as her father described. She looked at Walsh, who read it carefully and nodded his approval. With a slightly shaking hand, Rose signed her name. "One more thing," Thomas said. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small velvet bag, which he pushed toward Rose. "Your mother's locket. I want you to have it. I should have given it to you years ago." Rose opened the bag and pulled out the familiar locket, the simple gold one she had worn as a child, with her grandmother's faded picture inside. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Father," she whispered. Thomas stood up, and for a moment Rose thought he might embrace her. But years of distance were not so easily bridged. Instead, he simply nodded. "Be well, Rosemary," he said. "I hope you find everything you are looking for." And then he left, Bennett following behind him. Luther Graves remained for a moment, glaring at Rose and Yates with undisguised hatred. "You will regret this," he said coldly. "Both of you." "I do not think we will," Yates said, standing up and placing himself between Graves and Rose. "And I think it is time for you to leave now." Graves stalked out, slamming the door behind him. Rose let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. It was over. It was finally, truly over. Walsh shook both their hands. "Congratulations, Mrs. Tucker. You are free and clear. I would suggest leaving Tombstone as soon as possible, just to avoid any further unpleasantness, but legally, you have nothing more to worry about." They left the courthouse an hour later, after completing the final paperwork. Rose expected to feel elated, victorious, but instead, she mostly felt exhausted and oddly sad. She had gotten what she wanted, her freedom and her father's acknowledgement, but there was no joy in it, no sense of triumph, only a quiet resignation that some relationships could not be repaired, no matter how much you might wish otherwise. Yates seemed to sense her mood. He took her hand as they walked toward the hotel where they had left their horses. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I do not know," Rose admitted. "I thought I would feel different, having faced them, having won, but I just feel empty." "That is normal," Yates said. "You spent your whole life wanting your father to see you, to understand you, to love you the way a father should love a daughter. And today you finally accepted that he cannot give you what you need. That is a grief, Rose. It is okay to mourn it." Rose stopped walking and turned to face him, right there in the middle of Allen Street. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Yates cupped her face in his hands. "Because I love you," he said simply. "And when you love someone, you learn to see them, to understand what they need, even when they cannot say it." Rose kissed him, not caring who saw, not caring what anyone thought. When they broke apart, she saw several people staring, including a few she recognized from her time living in Tombstone. Let them stare, she thought. Let them gossip. She was Rose Tucker now, and she was free. They spent that night at the hotel, leaving Tombstone at first light the next morning. Rose did not look back as they rode north, toward Pine Valley, toward home. That chapter of her life was closed. Everything that mattered was riding beside her now, and everything else was ahead of them. They returned to Pine Valley to find that Mrs. Patterson had kept Rose's job open and that the ranch foreman had not filled Yates's position, hoping he would return. Life resumed its familiar rhythm, and slowly the tension and worry of the past weeks faded. Spring came to Pine Valley, bringing wildflowers and warm sunshine. Rose discovered she was pregnant in early April, and Yates responded to the news by picking her up and spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. They spent the summer preparing for the baby, fixing up the cabin, building a cradle, arguing playfully about names. Their son was born on a cold December night, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him James Wyatt Tucker, after Yates's grandfather and Rose's mother's maiden name. Holding him for the first time, Rose felt her heart expand in ways she had not known possible. Yates proved to be a devoted father, taking to parenthood with the same patience and care he brought to everything else. Rose watched him cradle their tiny son, singing soft lullabies, and fell even more deeply in love with him. The years passed, bringing both challenges and joys. They had two more children, a daughter named Margaret, after Yates's sister, and another son they called Thomas, a name Rose chose as a tentative olive branch to her father, even though they had not spoken since that day in Tombstone. Yates worked his way up to foreman at the Triple Creek Ranch, earning the respect of the owner and the other hands through his skill and integrity. Rose eventually took over management of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house when the older woman decided to retire, turning it into one of the most successful establishments in Pine Valley. They built a larger house on the edge of town, with space for their growing family and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set. Rose filled it with books and laughter, creating the kind of home she had always dreamed of: warm, welcoming, full of love and possibility. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Rose by taking her out to the same spot on the prairie where they had first met, where he had lain down beside her and watched the clouds. They had not been back since that day. They spread out a blanket in the grass, and Rose found herself lying there again, staring up at the sky, watching the clouds drift and change. Yates lay down beside her, just as he had all those years ago, and took her hand. "Do you remember?" he asked softly. "Every second," Rose said. "I remember being so angry, so scared, so certain that my life was over before it had really begun. And then you appeared and changed everything." "You changed everything," Yates corrected. "You were the one who was brave enough to take a chance, to trust me, to leave behind everything you knew. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "That one," Rose said, pointing at a cloud, "looks like a dragon." Yates studied it. "I think it looks more like a very fat cat." Rose laughed, the sound ringing out across the prairie. "You have no imagination." "I have plenty of imagination," Yates protested. "I imagined you, did I not? I imagined a life with you, a home, children, growing old together. And somehow, miraculously, all of those imaginings came true." Rose turned on her side, propping herself up on her elbow to look down at him. His hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me with you? Giving up your freedom to drift from place to place?" "Not for a single moment," Yates said firmly. He reached up to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. "You are my adventure, Rose. You and our children and the life we have built together. That is more exciting and fulfilling than anything I could have found on the road." Rose kissed him, slow and deep, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into it. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, she rested her head on his chest and listened to his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Yates asked, running his fingers through her hair. "For lying down beside me that day," Rose said. "For watching the clouds with me. For seeing me when no one else did. For giving me the freedom to become who I was always meant to be." "Thank you for letting me," Yates said. "For trusting me. For loving me. For making me a better man than I ever thought I could be." They stayed there for hours, just as they had on that first day, watching the sky, talking, holding each other. Around them, the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, wild and free and beautiful. Above them, the clouds drifted past in an endless procession of shapes and possibilities. And in that moment, lying in the grass with the man she loved, Rose felt complete. She had found her place in the world, not through anyone else's plan or design, but through her own choices, her own courage, her own heart. She had found love and partnership, and a family that filled her days with meaning. The journey from that desperate afternoon outside Tombstone to this peaceful moment had been long and sometimes frightening, but every step had been worth it because every step had led her here, to this exact place, this exact moment, this exact life. The clouds continued their slow dance across the Arizona sky, changing shape, drifting apart, coming together again. Rose watched them with Yates's hand in hers and knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made the right choice. Every single day she would choose this life, choose this man, choose this love. And that, she thought, was the greatest freedom of all. Not the absence of obligation or responsibility, but the presence of choice, the power to shape your own destiny, the courage to reach for happiness even when the world tells you to settle for less. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Rose and Yates packed up their blanket and rode home together, side by side, toward the warm lights of their house and the sound of their children's laughter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new adventures, but tonight and every night they would face it together. And that made all the difference.